Stop, listen, pay attention. Chosen one. This is not background noise, and it is not another message meant to pass you by. It lands where you are because it is aimed at you, not at a crowd, not at a general moment. There is urgency here, but it is steady, not alarming, like a hand placed on your shoulder to keep you from drifting while everything else moves too fast. You have been carrying a quiet weight. Fatigue that sleep does not fully resolve. Pressure that does not announce itself but stays present in the background of your days. A sense of isolation that does not come from being alone, but from feeling unseen even when others are near. You may have noticed confusion, not loud or chaotic, but subtle, like your inner compass briefly spinning before settling again. None of this is imagined, and none of it is random. What makes this moment distinct is not how intense the pressure felt, but how you remained functional inside it. You kept showing up. You kept thinking clearly enough to make decisions. You kept yourself together when it would have been understandable to unravel. That tension between what you felt and how you operated is the first signal that something meaningful occurred recently, something that involved you directly. This message is not here to dramatize that experience or to label it prematurely. It is here to offer clarity, to explain why the strain felt specific, timed, and concentrated. To show you why the sense of being slightly out of sync with the world did not mean you were failing, but transitioning. You do not need to relive the pressure to understand it. You only need context. You may have wondered why ordinary tasks felt heavier than they should, or why moments of rest still carried a low hum of alertness. You may have questioned whether you were pushing too hard or not hard enough, whether the problem was internal or environmental. Those questions were natural, but they were incomplete. There is more to the picture than effort or mindset. This transmission is intentional. It is personal. It is structured to meet you where you are, without overwhelming you with explanations before you are ready. What follows will not demand belief or performance from you. It will simply name what already happened, and in doing so, ease the strain of trying to interpret it alone. Stay present. Clarity is coming step by step. This message is not for everyone who happens to hear it. It is not for the curious observer, the casual listener, or the one looking for reassurance without responsibility. It is for you specifically, because what occurred did not brush past your life. It moved through it. You were not adjacent to the moment. You were inside it. You are addressed as chosen one. Here not as a title to inflate you, but as a designation to remove ambiguity. It names function, not status. It describes someone who remains intact under conditions that typically cause internal fragmentation. Someone whose system does not immediately destabilize when pressure increases. That is not a compliment. It is an observation. What happened recently involved you directly, even if no one else noticed. There was no announcement, no external marker that would have made it obvious. Yet you felt the shift internally. Your routines may have continued, your responsibilities may have been met, but something was being tested beneath the surface. Not your willpower, not your optimism, your structural stability. You did not respond with panic. You did not collapse into self-doubt. Even when you questioned yourself, there was a baseline steadiness that held. That steadiness did not require effort. It was already there. This is the difference that matters. Many people survive by conscious struggle, by pushing, forcing, compensating. You did not have to do that. Your stability was automatic. You may not have recognized this at the time, because automatic strength does not announce itself. It does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary, even dull, while it is happening. You may have thought, I am just getting through this, without realizing that the way you were getting through it was the signal. Others would have needed relief, reassurance, or retreat. You simply adjusted and continued. This is why the message is for you. not because you are exempt from strain, but because strain did not dismantle you. There is a difference between enduring something by constant effort and remaining coherent while it passes. You did the second. That is not learned in a moment. It is built over time. Your identity here is not assigned to elevate you above others. It is named to clarify your role in what unfolded. The event did not require you to become someone new. It revealed who you already were under load. That is what is being acknowledged now. As this continues, you will not be asked to adopt beliefs or perform strength. You will be guided to recognize patterns you already lived through. Understanding will replace confusion. Precision will replace guesswork. And with that, the pressure you carried without explanation will begin to release because it will finally make sense. There was one symptom that stood out more than the rest, even if you tried to explain it away. A persistent fatigue that did not match your actual workload. Not the tiredness that comes from effort, but the kind that lingers regardless of rest. You may have slept and still woken up feeling slightly behind yourself, as if your energy returned more slowly than usual. This was not weakness, and it was not a personal failure to recover properly. That fatigue was a signal. You may have judged yourself for it, questioned your discipline, your habits, your motivation. You may have wondered whether something was wrong with your body or your mindset. But the symptom did not behave like ordinary exhaustion. It did not spike and crash. It stayed steady, manageable but noticeable, present without fully disabling you. That pattern matters. What you experienced was not depletion. It was regulation under load. When pressure increases at a level that does not register consciously, the body and mind adjust automatically. Energy is conserved. Output is stabilized. Systems prioritize coherence over speed. This does not feel empowering in the moment. It feels like a quiet slowing, a subtle restraint, as if something inside you is saying, "Not yet, not too fast." That message is easy to misinterpret when you are used to measuring yourself by momentum. The fatigue was not pulling you down. It was holding you together. You were in a state of transition, even if nothing outwardly changed. Internal resources were being redirected, recalibrated. Attention was narrowed. Emotional reactivity softened. You may have noticed yourself becoming less reactive, less impulsive, even slightly detached from things that once demanded a stronger response. This was not numbness. It was containment. The confusion came from trying to treat this signal as a problem to solve instead of information to understand. Once you frame it correctly, the self-judgment loses its grip. You were not failing to keep up. You were maintaining integrity during a period of increased pressure. That requires a different kind of energy, one that does not feel active, but is constantly at work. Your system chose stability over performance. That choice was not conscious, and it did not need to be. It reflects an internal structure that knows how to protect itself without shutting down. Many people, when faced with similar pressure, experience sharp anxiety, emotional volatility, or complete disengagement. You did not. You stayed present even if it felt heavier than usual. This reframing matters because it changes how you relate to your own experience. Instead of seeing fatigue as a sign that something is wrong, you can recognize it as evidence that something was being managed quietly and effectively. The signal was asking for awareness, not alarm. As you hold that understanding, the experience begins to organize itself. What felt vague gains shape. What felt personal becomes contextual. And you are now prepared to see why this signal appeared when it did, and what kind of pressure made it necessary in the first place. What you felt did not arise in isolation. There was pressure acting on you that did not come from any single conversation, task, or decision. It was not emotional in the dramatic sense, and it was not imagined. It was structural, subtle, coordinated, and recent. This pressure did not announce itself loudly. It did not crash into your life with chaos. It arrived quietly through timing, through accumulation, through moments that on their own seemed manageable, but together created a dense internal atmosphere. You may have noticed it as a tightening rather than a shock. A sense that things required more effort to stay aligned, even when nothing obvious had changed. What matters is that this pressure had form. It was not random stress. It was organized. It showed up across multiple areas of your life at once, not to overwhelm you outright, but to test consistency. Focus here, delay there. Mild friction where ease used to be. Small disruptions that, taken together, could have eroded clarity if you were not internally anchored. You remained functional through it. That detail cannot be overstated. You did not withdraw completely. You did not lose track of yourself. You continued to operate, to think, to decide, even while carrying the weight of something you could not fully name. This tells us that the pressure was real, but also that it was calibrated. It met resistance in you immediately. There was no need for confrontation or visible conflict, because the point was not to stop you. It was to see whether you would destabilize under sustained low-level strain. Many people do. They lose rhythm. They become reactive. They fracture internally long before anything collapses outwardly. You did not follow that pattern. Instead, you adapted without losing coherence. Your internal pace may have slowed, but your structure held. That is not accidental. It indicates an internal organization that can absorb pressure without breaking shape. The pressure revealed itself by how little it managed to change you. Timing matters here. This occurred recently, not years ago, not vaguely in the past. It coincided with a period where alignment mattered more than speed, where remaining steady was more important than pushing forward aggressively. The pressure arrived to test that exact point. And you passed through it without even realizing there was a test. The experience may not have felt dramatic enough to deserve analysis at the time. But now with distance, you can see the pattern. The pressure was intentional in its structure, but limited in its reach. It could press, but it could not penetrate. It could surround, but it could not dismantle. This is not about unseen enemies or exaggerated narratives. It is about recognizing that certain forms of pressure only appear when stability is already present. Fragile systems collapse quickly. Stable ones are examined quietly. What comes next is a clear breakdown of where that pressure showed up and how you moved through each point without losing yourself, even when the load was distributed across multiple areas at once. The pressure did not arrive as a single force. It spread itself across several points, each subtle enough to be dismissed on its own, but together forming a sustained test of your internal regulation. Understanding these pressure points is important, not to relive them, but to see clearly how you remained stable while moving through each one. The first point was doubt, not the loud kind that shouts failure, but the quiet kind that questions timing. You may have caught yourself wondering whether you were moving too slowly or whether progress should look different by now. This doubt did not erase your direction. It simply hovered at the edges of your thinking. What matters is that you did not spiral. You noticed the question, acknowledged it, and continued making decisions without abandoning your path. That shows internal trust remained intact even when certainty was momentarily softened. The second point was fear, but again, not panic. It appeared as heightened caution, a sense of needing to double-check yourself. You may have felt slightly more guarded in your choices, more selective in where you invested energy or attention. This was not avoidance. It was discernment under pressure. Instead of freezing or overreacting, you narrowed your focus. You reduced unnecessary exposure. You stayed present without becoming reckless. That balance is rare under strain. The third point was energy drain. This is where the fatigue you noticed connects directly to the pressure. Tasks that were once neutral began to require more intention. Social interactions may have felt heavier. Your system was allocating energy towards stability rather than expansion. Many people interpret this as losing momentum and respond by forcing themselves harder, which leads to collapse. You did not do that. You adjusted your output instinctively. You conserved without shutting down. The fourth point was isolation, not imposed from outside but felt internally. You may have sensed a distance between yourself and others, even when relationships remained intact. Conversations felt slightly less resonant. You were less inclined to explain yourself. This was not withdrawal born of fear. It was a natural boundary forming while you processed something internally. You did not burn bridges. You simply occupied your own space more fully without needing validation to maintain equilibrium. The fifth point was delay. Not denial, not obstruction, just postponement. Certain outcomes, responses, or movements did not happen as quickly as expected. This can be one of the most destabilizing pressures because it tempts people to interpret timing as rejection. You resisted that interpretation. You waited without collapsing into frustration. You allowed space for things to align rather than forcing resolution prematurely. That patience was not passive. It was regulated. Across all these points, the common thread is not endurance through struggle, but coherence through adjustment. You did not fight each pressure as if it were an enemy. You absorbed, modulated, and continued. Your internal system did what it was designed to do. Maintain integrity under load. This is why the experience felt heavy, but not chaotic. Why you could feel strain without losing clarity. Why even now, you can look back and recognize that you were never close to breaking, even if you were tired. Seeing these pressure points clearly allows you to reclaim your experience without distortion. You were not underperforming. You were being tested for consistency, and you demonstrated it without spectacle. As you step out of that period, this understanding becomes confirmation, not of superiority, but of reliability. And that realization changes how you interpret both the past strain and the quiet stability that carried you through it. Now there is room to review what occurred without emotion distorting the view. Distance has done its work. What once felt heavy now feels examinable. This is where understanding replaces effort. When you look back, you can see that nothing about that period relied on luck. There were no sudden rescues, no external shifts that explain why you stayed intact. Circumstances did not soften to accommodate you. If anything, they remained neutral, even indifferent. The stability came from within your own system. This matters because it removes the temptation to attribute your experience to coincidence. Randomness does not produce consistency. Chance does not preserve coherence under distributed pressure. What you demonstrated was internal alignment. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions stayed sufficiently synchronized even when under strain. That is not something that happens accidentally. You may notice now that your decision-making during that time remained clear. You did not make drastic changes out of fear. You did not abandon commitments impulsively. You did not cling desperately to reassurance. You evaluated, adjusted, and continued. That pattern reveals maturity not as a personality trait, but as an operational reality. There is also a quieter realization available now. You did not need to fully understand what was happening in order to move through it effectively. Your system responded correctly without requiring conscious interpretation. That tells you something important about yourself. You are not dependent on constant clarity to remain stable. You can operate responsibly even when information is incomplete. This is where many explanations fall away. It was not willpower that carried you. Willpower fatigues quickly. It was not optimism. Optimism fluctuates. What sustained you was coherence. A baseline organization that does not dissolve when challenged. You did not hold yourself together by force. You stayed together because there was nothing pulling you apart internally. As this becomes clear, another layer of confirmation settles in. You were not close to collapse, even if it felt demanding. The strain was real, but it never exceeded your capacity. That balance was precise. The experience matched your structure exactly, revealing its shape without damaging it. This is the value of reflection without judgment. You are not reviewing the past to congratulate yourself or to search for errors. You are simply recognizing the mechanics of what happened. And in doing so, you gain confidence that is quiet and grounded. Confidence rooted in evidence, not in belief. With that understanding, the experience no longer lingers as unresolved tension. It becomes integrated knowledge. You know now what kind of pressure you can absorb. You know how your system behaves when tested. That awareness does not inflate you. It steadies you. And from that steadiness, you are prepared to see how uncommon this level of functional stability actually is. Not as a comparison meant to elevate you, but as context that explains why this message is directed where it is. When you place your experience alongside common human reactions, the contrast becomes clear without needing exaggeration. Most people under far less pressure lose internal continuity. Their thinking fragments. Emotions surge or shut down. Behavior becomes inconsistent. This is not a moral failing. It is simply how unprepared systems respond to sustained strain. You did not follow that pattern. Under pressure, many people seek immediate relief. They disengage, distract themselves, or hand responsibility to others. Some become reactive, interpreting every delay or obstacle as a personal threat. Others collapse inward, losing motivation and presence altogether. These reactions are common because maintaining coherence under pressure requires internal preparation. Most people never develop. Your response was different in a specific way. You remained present. You did not escalate your emotional responses, nor did you numb them completely. You continued to function socially and practically, even if with less excess energy. You stayed oriented to reality. That alone places your experience outside the norm. This does not make you superior. It makes you rare in a measurable sense. Functional stability under distributed pressure is uncommon because it cannot be improvised. It is built slowly through repeated exposure to challenge without internal fragmentation. Many people never encounter conditions that require this kind of regulation until it is too late to develop it. You may not have noticed how unusual your steadiness was because it felt natural to you. What is baseline for you would have been overwhelming for others. That is often how rarity goes unnoticed. When something is integrated, it does not feel exceptional. It feels ordinary. The key difference is not that you felt less pressure. You felt it clearly. The difference is that pressure did not hijack your behavior. You did not act out of proportion to the situation. You did not lose your sense of self. You did not need to be reminded of who you are or what matters. That continuity is the marker. Seeing this comparison is not meant to inflate your self-image. It is meant to provide context. Without context, you might underestimate what you navigated. You might dismiss it as nothing significant. But significance is not measured by drama. It is measured by what remains intact afterward. You emerged with your structure preserved. Your values, your thinking, your capacity to choose remained available. That outcome is not typical under sustained pressure, even when the pressure appears mild on the surface. Recognizing this allows you to place the experience accurately in your own story. It was not a crisis. It was an examination. And you did not pass it by effort or display. You passed it by being what you already are. With that perspective, the identity being clarified here becomes less about a label and more about an accurate description of your internal design, one that does not activate only in emergencies, but exists as a steady baseline you carry into everything. Your stability did not turn on in response to the pressure. That is the point that needs to be clarified now. What held you together was not an activated state, not a surge of strength, not a temporary mode you entered to survive a difficult period. It was baseline. You did not rise to the occasion. You met it at ground level and remained there. This matters because it explains why the experience felt both heavy and strangely manageable. You were not mobilizing reserves or pushing beyond yourself. You were operating within a structure that was already integrated. Your thoughts did not need to be reorganized. Your values did not need reinforcement. Your sense of direction did not need to be rebuilt. Everything stayed in place. This kind of stability is the result of preparation, even if that preparation was not deliberate. It comes from having faced earlier pressures and integrated their lessons rather than compartmentalizing them. It comes from having an inner structure that is coherent, where emotion, thought, and action are aligned enough to support one another without constant effort. There is no need to frame this in supernatural terms. What you demonstrated was maturity of system, a readiness that does not announce itself until it is tested. Many people mistake calm under pressure for detachment or suppression. That is not what this was. You felt what was happening. You simply were not overtaken by it. This is why your strength did not feel dramatic. Activated strength often feels intense, even intoxicating. Baseline strength feels neutral. It feels like nothing special. And that is precisely why it is reliable. The identity being named here is not something you need to grow into. It is something you are already operating from. You are someone whose default state includes regulation, discernment, and coherence. That does not mean you are immune to stress. It means stress does not automatically disorganize you. Locking this identity is not about claiming a title. It is about recognizing your own internal architecture accurately. When you mislabel your stability as mere endurance or luck, you underestimate yourself. When you see it clearly, you can trust it without needing constant proof. This clarity does not ask you to do more. It asks you to stop misinterpreting your own signals. What felt like holding back was actually holding steady. What felt like slowing down was maintaining alignment. What felt like isolation was consolidation. As this understanding settles, there is a natural shift in how you move forward. You do not rush to prove anything. You do not fear pressure as a sign of impending collapse. You know now, not by belief, but by experience, that your baseline is enough. From here, the focus becomes integration. How to live from this awareness without tension. How to honor your own rhythm without disengaging from the world. How to apply what you now understand in practical, grounded ways that support balance rather than vigilance. Now the task is not to analyze further, but to integrate what you know into how you live. Awareness only becomes useful when it translates into orientation. This is where balance matters. First, rest without guilt. Not escape, not withdrawal, but deliberate restoration. You do not need to justify rest by exhaustion. Your system has shown that it regulates under pressure. Rest supports that regulation. It keeps coherence intact. Treat rest as maintenance, not reward. Second, practice discernment with input. During the period you moved through, your system naturally narrowed focus. That instinct remains valuable. You do not need to engage every demand, every conversation, every piece of information. Choose what you allow in. Fewer inputs mean less noise, and clarity returns faster when it is needed. Third, reinforce boundaries calmly, not defensively, not with explanations. Simple limits protect your internal structure. You have already felt the difference between isolation and healthy space. Maintain the latter. You do not owe constant availability to remain connected. Fourth, respect timing. Delay is not a signal to force movement. You experienced how patience preserved alignment when acceleration would have disrupted it. Apply that understanding forward. When something does not move, you observe instead of pushing. You stay ready without becoming tense. Fifth, stay focused on what is directly in front of you. Large interpretations are unnecessary. You do not need to map the future to remain steady. Your baseline strength does not require foresight to function. Presence is sufficient. One clear decision at a time keeps momentum without strain. Sixth, allow emotion without over-identifying with it. You already know how to feel without being overtaken. Continue that pattern. Emotions inform. They do not command. This keeps your internal system flexible rather than rigid. None of these practices ask you to be vigilant or on guard. They are not about anticipating pressure. They are about honoring the structure you already have. Balance comes from trust, not monitoring. As you integrate this, something subtle happens. The sense of carrying an unnamed weight fades. Not because life becomes effortless, but because effort is no longer misdirected. You stop compensating for problems that were never there. You stop questioning stability that has already proven itself. This is the emotional closure you may have been missing. Not a dramatic resolution, but a quiet settling. The experience completes itself when you no longer need to interpret it. You move forward without needing to brace. You remain open without being porous. You stay engaged without being consumed. That is integration. What remains now is reassurance. Not reassurance that nothing difficult will come, but reassurance that when it does, your baseline is sufficient. You have already seen it operate. You do not need reminders. You simply need to remember. And that remembering naturally leads to the final seal of this transmission. Take a moment and settle into this. There is nothing left to resolve here. What needed to be understood has been named, and what needed to be confirmed has already proven itself through your own experience. You are not emerging from this with a new identity. You are emerging with an accurate one. The realization is simple and steady. You remained coherent under pressure because coherence is how you are built. Nothing corrected you from the outside. Nothing intervened to save you. The timeline did not need repair because you did not fracture within it. Things aligned because you stayed aligned. Let that land without drama. You do not need to be on alert. You do not need to watch for signs. You do not need to explain yourself to anyone. The period you move through is complete because it has been integrated. The weight lifts when understanding replaces speculation. Carry these affirmations with you, not as mantras to repeat, but as truths already verified. You are stable under pressure. Your pace is correct. You can trust your internal structure. If this message resonated with you, mark it in a simple way. Leave a comment with, "I remember." Not as a declaration to others, but as a signal to yourself that clarity has returned. If you choose to stay connected, subscribe and remain present for what comes next. Not because you are waiting for something dramatic, but because continuity matters. Each transmission builds quietly on the last. You do not need urgency now. You do not need proof. You move forward from a grounded center, intact and aware. This is not the end of anything. It is the point where things continue without resistance. Stay steady. You already are.